Seattle, a late winter afternoon. The city seemed cloaked in a silent layer of silver, as glistening light slid across window panes, skimming along high-rises like the sun's last attempt to pierce through before being swallowed by the fog. The ground had not yet turned dark, but the sky had grown unmistakably colder. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, leftover rain, and something faintly surreal, as if something was approaching, unpredictable and unseen. On the 47th floor of Westfield Tower, the CEO's office was designed like the cockpit of a futuristic vessel. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls wrapped around the space, offering a panoramic view of Puget Sound, its waters catching light like shattered mirrors. A man stood motionless at the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders squared, gaze unfocused, not clear whether he was looking at something or drifting somewhere far beyond. Graham Westfield, 48 years old, millionaire CEO, founder of Westfield Technologies, an empire redefining the future of artificial intelligence, a man the world admired and at times feared. For the past 20 years, Graham had never failed. From a converted warehouse in Belltown to a skyscraper bearing his name in the heart of Seattle, he had ascended like an arrow without deviation. Business magazines called him the man who redefined success. Tech media dubbed him the architect of the human-centered machine learning era, and global forums reserved him front-row seats. He had everything: a private penthouse at the top of the tower, a Maybach with the license plate GWW, a team of strategic advisors who could anticipate his needs with a single breath, and a company valued at over $90 billion. Yet there were still afternoons like this one, afternoons where he stood alone, suspended between glass and silence, and felt absolutely nothing. Not because he lacked anything, but because he no longer knew what was real. In the dim space between glass and fading light, stillness became the loudest sound of emptiness. 13 miles away, in an old rooftop apartment above a small bookstore on 18th Street, warm yellow light spilled from a wooden-framed window. Inside, time seemed to slow down. Eli Monroe, 26, a medical resident, leaned over to adjust the IV drip for the patient in bed. Sweat clung lightly to his forehead, not from exhaustion, but from fear. In the bed lay his mother, Clara Monroe, 43, a face once radiant, now pale, eyes sunken, yet still burning with steel resolve. The look of a woman who had raised 2 sons alone, in silence for over 2 decades, without ever letting them see her fall. Beside her sat Noah Monroe, Eli's twin brother, a public interest lawyer. His usually firm expression now bore a different shade, a raw, unguarded worry, like a child afraid of losing his mother. Clara had been fighting cancer for over a year. Each round of chemotherapy was a negotiation with fate. But this time, the doctors had used no metaphors. "We recommend the family prepare themselves." That sentence quietly crushed every inch of space in the small room, like a period at the end of a story, not spoken, but sighed. Eli asked nothing. Noah held his mother's hand, and Clara, with her slow, measured breathing, was the one to break the silence. "There's something I've kept from you both for far too long." Eli and Noah both looked up, holding their breath. "Your father," she said slowly, clearly, each word deliberate. "Is Graham Westfield." Silence, dense like fog settling in the soul. Graham Westfield, the man whose face appeared at every conference they had once dreamed of attending. The man who spoke of education, equity, and ethical technology. while their mother worked part-time as a waitress just to afford textbooks. The man the world called a symbol of intelligence, and whom they called nothing at all, because no one dared say his name. Eli set down the pen on the tray. Noah turned away. Clara gently reached for the wooden drawer beside her bed, retrieving something long kept away. A worn leather journal, frayed edges, loose spine. She placed it on the table between her sons. Inside, yellowed pages, handwritten in neat strokes, some smudged by time and tears. It held the memories of a gifted young programmer, eyes sharp as blades, a voice that could silence a whole boardroom, of long nights together in a cramped office, coding side by side, while debating the philosophy of education, of the way Graham had once looked at Clara, and of the goodbye she never spoke. When she learned she was pregnant, Clara had quietly left the company. No message, no phone call, no email, no accusations, no begging. "I didn't want to ruin his dream," Clara said, her voice soft, like an apology. He was standing on the edge of success, and I didn't want to be the one to pull him down. Inside the journal was also a letter, unfinished. The first line read, "Graham, if one day you're reading this..." She had never sent it. Noah clenched his fists. Eli stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at a Seattle slowly lighting up for the night. Out there, among thousands of glass windows and glowing billboards, there was a man standing at the top floor of a tower that bore his name, and he had no idea that he had 2 sons, and a woman fading away. The room seemed to shrink after Clara's words. No one said anything. Eli remained by the window, his hand resting on the weathered wooden frame. Noah gripped his mother's hand tightly, eyes wide open yet vacant, as if his brain were frantically combing through every memory for a crack, a sign, a clue, to match the name just spoken aloud. Graham Westfield, not just a name, a definition, a symbol. A man is known by the world, except by them. "Graham Westfield," Eli repeated, barely audible. "You mean him? The CEO of Westfield Technologies?" Clara nodded, slowly, without flinching. "I kept it from you, not because I was ashamed," she said, eyes turning to the ceiling, her voice steady, like telling an old, tired story. "But because I was afraid the truth would hurt you more than help you." "And now?" Noah asked, voice hoarse. Clara turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. "Because I don't have time left to keep it anymore." The brown leather journal lay between the 2 brothers. The yellow light from the desk lamp fell across its cracked cover, revealing the wrinkles of time and memory. Noah carefully opened to the first page. Their mother's handwriting appeared, clear, neat, full of emotion. Tuesday, October 7th, 1998. His office today smelled like a burnt coffee factory, but the way he looked at the circuit board, as if the whole world had narrowed to a single path ahead, and he was diving into it, no matter the cost. Eli tilted his head to read along with his brother. The next page showed a clipping from an old newspaper, a photo of Graham standing in front of his first office in Belltown, holding a whiteboard scrawled with the words, "Every idea deserves to live once." "God," Eli breathed. This wasn't just some relationship, Noah murmured, flipping rapidly through the next pages. Mom was really a part of the beginning. Clara nodded, eyes closed. "I was the first software engineer he ever hired. Back then his team had only 4 people. We worked in a converted warehouse. No heating, no assistants, no reputation." Eli furrowed his brow, and then You got pregnant." "Yes." Clara opened her eyes, and at that time, he had just secured his first deal with the Watson Foundation. That was the turning point. That was also when I knew I had to leave. Noah narrowed his eyes. Why not tell him? Clara gave a faint smile, bittersweet and proud, because he had a wife, and a life about to change. I didn't want to be the reason that fell apart. "You made the decision for him," Eli said, not accusing, just stating the truth. "I loved him," Clara replied, "but I didn't want that love to become a burden." The two brothers sat in silence for hours afterward, reading every page of the journal. They read about nights when Clara stood in Cary Park, looking out at Westfield Tower, when that tower was just a blueprint on paper, and later, a real beacon on the Seattle skyline. They read about the nights she stayed awake, while both twins cried at once, and about the times she stood outside their college classrooms, quietly waiting for their test results, unseen, unknown as a woman who was once a mathematical prodigy. Each line was a carving into their hearts, not because the truth was too cruel, but because it had been hidden for so long, because it had been too silent, and they had lived 26 years beside a woman who carried that weight. Alone. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Outside, it had begun to rain, a fine, cold, persistent rain, like the breathing rhythm of a city that never sleeps. Noah got up and walked to the bookshelf. He pulled out an old dusty file box. Inside were all the documents he had collected over the years on Graham Westfield, as part of his legal work researching major tech conglomerates. Ironically, he had once written a 20-page thesis on AI ethics, citing Graham as a prime case study. He picked up a printed copy of Graham's famous 2021 speech at the National Education Forum. A bolded line at the top read, "Technology should not be a privilege. It must be a bridge, and every child, regardless of origin, color, or circumstance, deserves the right to walk across that bridge." Noah let out a short, bitter laugh. "Sounds like he wrote that for himself, not knowing he'd left 2 children behind," he said, voice sharp. Eli didn't respond. He was still staring at the journal. Then he spoke. He didn't know. But now, he should. The next morning, Clara woke late. Her eyes looked tired, but at peace. Noah sat at the table, typing. Eli was boiling water for tea. Clara looked at her sons and asked softly, "What will you do?" Eli didn't turn around. His voice was as light as the steam rising from the kettle. "You once said, if the old light ever came back, we should look straight at it." Noah nodded. "It's time we walk toward it. Not to demand anything, just to speak the truth." Clara looked at them for a long time, then nodded. "Then go. But go as men, not as lost boys." In that small apartment, a chapter closed, and another one filled with challenges, emotion, and hope had just begun. The sky over Seattle that day was ash-gray, thick as if it held 1,000 untold stories. The fog hadn't lifted, and the sunlight was still just an unfulfilled promise. But inside that little apartment in Capitol Hill, destiny had already scheduled an encounter. And this time, none of the 3 could turn back. Clara remained in bed. Her eyes were clearer than the night before, but her voice had weakened. Eli checked her vitals. Noah folded the stack of papers they had spread across the floor the night before. The room had become the starting point of an investigation, not because someone needed to be blamed, but because the truth needed to emerge. "The Westfield Technologies Charity Gala," Noah said, his voice hoarse after a sleepless night. 3 days from now, hosted at the Skyfire. Eli looked up. That's the place. The restaurant Mom used to point out whenever we sat at Kerry Park, isn't it? Clara heard him. She nodded slightly. She'd say, "That's where rich people go to prove they have a heart," Eli said with a wry smile, eyes still locked on the monitor. Looking back, maybe she saw that place as a kind of edge. Noah placed a stack of papers on the table, his expression hardening. "I can get us in. One of the judges from last year's case I handled is on the events organizing board. He owes me a thank you for keeping the press away from his younger brother." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You can get us tickets?" Noah nodded. 2 tickets, young honoree's table. No one will question it. Clara slowly tried to sit up. "What are you planning to do there? Confront him? Make a scene? Shout across the gala that he abandoned 2 children who never knew their father?" Noah walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. "No, Mom. We're not going to destroy his world." Eli added, "We're just going to open the door you've kept closed for 26 years. Clara looked at both of them, her gaze a mix of worry and pride. "Then don't go as wounded boys. Go as men who know exactly who they are." That afternoon, Noah made the call, short, precise. The next morning, 2 cream-colored envelopes with silver trim were delivered to their hands, embossed with Skyfire's logo and the elegant print, "Future Code Gala, Transforming Access Through AI. Special Guests, N. Monroe, E. Monroe." Eli held the invitation in silence. Noah read every line, scanning it like a legal contract. "Friday night, 7 p.m. Dress code, black tie," he murmured. Eli gave a bitter smile. "Guess what? I've never worn a tuxedo in my life." Noah walked to the closet and opened the secret compartment Clara always used to stash things for graduations or birthdays. He pulled out 2 old suits, slightly worn, hand-stitched by their mother at the hems. "We should probably get used to the feeling of not quite fitting in." Eli laughed, but in his eyes was something like a childhood thrill. Just once, to step into a world they never belonged to. Not to beg, but to be seen. 2 days later, they went to a tailor near Union Square, a place known for altering clothes for billionaires right before IPO announcements. The elderly tailor eyed the 2 unfamiliar young men with suspicion at first, but when Noah mentioned the guest list and their assigned table, the man's demeanor shifted completely. "Mr. Westfield has his suits done here, too," he said while measuring Eli's sleeves. "Very particular. Once scolded me for using mismatched thread color." Noah and Eli caught each other's reflection in the 3-way mirror. Suddenly they saw traces of Graham staring back at them. The squared shoulders, the steady gaze, the quiet way of walking through a crowd without needing an introduction. That evening they returned to the hospital. Clara was sitting up, reading a book. The white light shone softly across her face, making the silver in her hair gleam with quiet grace. Noah handed her the invitations. Clara held them, her fingers trembling. "Are you sure?" she asked. Eli sat beside her. "This isn't about making him pay," he said. "It's about you, not carrying this alone anymore." Clara was silent for a long time. Her eyes looked tired but at peace. Noah sat at the table, typing. Eli was boiling water for tea. Clara looked at her sons and asked softly, "What will you do?" Eli didn't turn around. His voice was as light as the steam rising from the kettle. "You once said, if the old light ever came back, we should look straight at it." Noah nodded. "It's time we walk toward it. Not to demand anything, just to Speak the truth." Clara looked at them for a long time, then nodded. "Then go. But go as men, not as lost boys." In that small apartment, a chapter closed, and another one filled with challenges, emotion, and hope had just begun. The sky over Seattle that day was ash-gray, thick as if it held 1,000 untold stories. The fog hadn't lifted, and the sunlight was still just an unfulfilled promise. But inside that little apartment in Capitol Hill, destiny had already scheduled an encounter. And this time, none of the three could turn back. Clara remained in bed. Her eyes were clearer than the night before, but her voice had weakened. Eli checked her vitals. Noah folded the stack of papers they had spread across the floor the night before. The room had become the starting point of an investigation, not because someone needed to be blamed, but because the truth needed to emerge. "The Westfield Technologies Charity Gala," Noah said, his voice hoarse after a sleepless night. 3 days from now, hosted at the Skyfire. Eli looked up. "That's the place. The restaurant Mom used to point out whenever we sat at Kerry Park, isn't it?" Clara heard him. She nodded slightly. She'd say, "That's where rich people go to prove they have a heart," Eli said with a wry smile, eyes still locked on the monitor. Looking back, maybe she saw that place as a kind of edge. Noah placed a stack of papers on the table, his expression hardening. "I can get us in. One of the judges from last year's case I handled is on the events organizing board. He owes me a thank you for keeping the press away from his younger brother." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You can get us tickets?" Noah nodded. 2 tickets, young honorees table. No one will question it. Clara slowly tried to sit up. "What are you planning to do there? Confront him? Make a scene? Shout across the gala that he abandoned 2 children who never knew their father?" Noah walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. "No, Mom. We're not going to destroy his world." Eli added, "We're just going to open the door you've kept closed for 26 years. Clara looked at both of them, her gaze a mix of worry and pride. "Then don't go as wounded boys. Go as men who know exactly who they are." That afternoon, Noah made the call, short, precise. The next morning, 2 cream-colored envelopes with silver trim were delivered to their hands, embossed with Skyfire's logo and the elegant print, "Future Code Gala, Transforming Access Through AI. Special Guests, N. Monroe, E. Monroe." Eli held the invitation in silence. Noah read every line, scanning it like a legal contract. "Friday night, 7 p.m. Dress code, black tie," he murmured. Eli gave a bitter smile. "Guess what? I've never worn a tuxedo in my life." Noah walked to the closet and opened the secret compartment Clara always used to stash things for graduations or birthdays. He pulled out 2 old suits, slightly worn, hand-stitched by their mother at the hems. "We should probably get used to the feeling of not quite fitting in." Eli laughed, but in his eyes was something like a childhood thrill. Just once, to step into a world they never belonged to. Not to beg, but to be seen. 2 days later, they went to a tailor near Union Square, a place known for altering clothes for billionaires right before IPO announcements. The elderly tailor eyed the 2 unfamiliar young men with suspicion at first, but when Noah mentioned the guest list and their assigned table, the man's demeanor shifted completely. "Mr. Westfield has his suits done here, too," he said while measuring Eli's sleeves. "Very particular. Once scolded me for using mismatched thread color." Noah and Eli caught each other's reflection in the 3-way mirror. Suddenly they saw traces of Graham staring back at them. The squared shoulders, the steady gaze, the quiet way of walking through a crowd without needing an introduction. That evening they returned to the hospital. Clara was sitting up, reading a book. The white light shone softly across her face, making the silver in her hair gleam with quiet grace. Noah handed her the invitations. Clara held them, her fingers trembling. "Are you sure?" she asked. Eli sat beside her. "This isn't about making him pay," he said. "It's about you, not carrying this alone anymore." Clara was silent for a long time. A couple of young guests left behind an old leather notebook the other day. Thomas said, gesturing toward the reception desk, "I thought you should see it." Graham walked over, and the moment he saw the light brown notebook, frayed edges, the strap slightly askew, his heart clenched. He didn't need to open it to know. His hand, resting on the leather cover, felt like it was pressing against a past he had silently buried. "Leave it. I'll keep it." Later that evening, Graham stood by the window of his apartment, holding a glass of wine he never drank. His phone screen lit up with a message from his son in Switzerland. "Not coming home this Christmas, Dad. Training camp overlaps. Call you later." Graham stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone down. His mind drifted to the young man he'd run into that morning, the stance, the hesitant bow, the voice that reminded him of someone he had once loved, long ago. Clara. The name rose from his memory like a beam of light, piercing the thickest cloud. He had searched for her, but she had vanished as if she never existed. And now, part of her had returned, in the form of two grown men. One is a doctor, one is a lawyer, and he, a father who had never been called Dad. The Skyfire. 6:42 p.m. Atop Queen Anne Hill, the restaurant shimmered like a palace adrift in the clouds. Art Deco columns reflected on the glass dome above, casting a warm glow like a gentle fire spreading through the Seattle mist. The ground floor swelled with the opening notes of cello and piano, echoing beneath vaulted ceilings gilded in soft gold. The scent of wine mingled with new leather and expensive perfume. Seattle's elite flowed in from every direction, gowns sweeping across the marble floors like waves of color. At a modest corner near the center, table 9, two young guests entered. No one knew who they were, and no one could have guessed they were about to change the course of the entire evening. Noah Monroe, adjusting his tuxedo collar, let his gaze sweep the room like a lawyer reading a courtroom, where every glance might be evidence. Eli Monroe, tall and silent, stood with squared shoulders, eyes fixed on the stage being set ahead. Every so often his right hand touched the inside pocket of his jacket, where their mother's old letter lay. Neither spoke. They had rehearsed a dozen scenarios, but at this moment, the reality was too raw to match anything imagined. Thomas, the Skyfire manager, approached with a polished smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Table 9, correct? You're seated with our young honorees group near the speakers area. You may see Mr. Westfield very soon." Noah nodded subtly, saying nothing. Eli thanked him with a glance. They were led to their table, where a few other young guests were already seated. A software engineer from MIT, an education startup founder, and a tech journalist. "What do you two do?" the MIT girl asked, bright-voiced, but not arrogant. "Medicine and law," Eli replied shortly, with a faint wry smile. Noah added, "We specialize in healing, in our own way." The answer was just cryptic enough to spark curiosity, but no one pressed further. They weren't here to draw attention. They were here to witness, and, if necessary, to be seen. 7:09 p.m. A soft chime rang through the hall. The lights dimmed, and the evening's host stepped onto the stage, voice warm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to the man who has shaped not only the field of educational technology, but also the way we believe in the future. Mr. Graham Westfield. The applause thundered through the room, but for the two men at table 9, all sound faded beneath the weight of a silent, deep, and pounding heartbeat. Graham stepped onto the stage, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, light reflected off the vintage watch on his left wrist, an early model Omega, identical to the one Clara had once kept a photo of in her journal. Noah saw it. Eli saw it. And in that moment, as the light fell across his face, they no longer had any doubt. This was their father. "Tonight," Graham began, his voice low and firm, "we speak about the future. But not just about technology. We speak about opportunity, about equity, about bridges being built between lives that were never meant to intersect." Noah glanced at Eli. Both nodded, unspoken, but in sync. This speech, it felt as if it had been written for them. Graham continued, his gaze scanning the room like an invisible radar, and then his eyes stopped, a slight pause, as if he had just stumbled upon something uncomfortably familiar. Table 9, 2 young men, one tall, one sharp-eyed, and both carry a reflection of his younger self. His heart tightened. He blinked, moved on. "We build bridges, not to make the path easier, but to reach those we once left behind." Eli clenched his hands beneath the table. Noah exhaled slowly, not out of fear, but because those words felt like they had been lifted directly from their mother's journal. Dinner began. Graham stepped off the stage, making his way through the room to greet guests. The sound of clinking glasses, toasts, polite laughter. And then he approached table 9. Noah stood first, polite but unwavering in his gaze. Eli followed, 3 men, standing no more than an arm's length apart, and yet between them stood 26 years of unspoken truths. Graham extended his hand. "Gentlemen, I'm Graham." Noah shook his hand first. "Noah Monroe." Eli followed. "Eli Monroe." Graham paused briefly at the sound of the name. Monroe. He had read that name. In the hospital residency profile, in the newsletter, in his memory, and in a leather-bound notebook he had locked in his safe that very morning. "A pleasure," he said, his voice dipping a tone. "Feels like we've met somewhere before," he added, lightly spoken, but enough for both sides to know. He felt something. Noah smiled faintly. "I'm sure we have, Mr. Westfield." Eli remained silent, but his eyes betrayed everything. Graham nodded and stepped away, but he didn't go far. He turned back to look once more. Noah leaned toward Eli and whispered, "He's starting to remember." Eli placed a hand over his chest, where the letter rested. "We don't need to say anything. The truth is stepping into the light on its own." And outside the sky fire, in the cold darkness of a December night in Seattle, something had just been named for the first time in many years. A father, 2 sons, 1 night, 1 beginning, 8:24 p.m. The gala at the sky fire continued. Inside, dazzling lights sparkled. The clinking of glasses danced alongside the smooth flow of jazz like a velvet river. But at a quiet corner along the glass hallway leading to the terrace, Noah stood leaning on the railing, eyes gazing down at the shimmering lights of Seattle in the distance. In his pocket was his mother's letter, still sealed, like a sentence never spoken. Eli approached from behind. He didn't say anything, just handed Noah his phone. On the screen was a short message from the hospital. Clara Monroe, critical condition, immediate family presence required. The world collapsed in a single heartbeat. Noah looked up at his brother, but in Eli's eyes he saw not panic, but the steadiness of a doctor trained to carry grief in silence. Calm, composed, but his gaze had cracked. "We have to go," Eli said. "Right now." Noah nodded, and just as they turned, a voice came from behind them, stopping them cold. "Monroe, are you two Clara Monroe's sons?" Graham Westfield stood a few steps away. His face had gone pale. The wineglass in his hand trembled, not from alcohol, but from the flood of truth crashing into him like a broken dam. No one spoke at first. Silence fell over the hallway like a heavy curtain. Eli was the first to nod. "Yes, we're her sons, and yours." Graham said nothing. He looked at the two young men standing before him, same height, pale green eyes, features so achingly familiar it hurt to breathe. A part of him was standing there, alive, and he had never known. Noah pulled the letter from his pocket. "She wrote this to you 26 years ago, but she never sent it." Graham took the letter as one might hold a relic from a forgotten world. His fingers trembled as he read the first line on the envelope. "Graham, if one day you're reading this..." He didn't open it. He couldn't. Not here. "Is she alive?" he asked, voice hoarse. "She's waiting," Eli said, "but there's not much time." Graham nodded. Not another word. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cancel everything. Send the car up. I'm going with them." Harborview Medical Center, 9:07 p.m. 3 men walked into the hospital lobby under a light drizzle. No one spoke on the way. Only the whir of the car's heater and the ticking of Graham's vintage watch filled the space. Clara had been moved to a critical care room. Her heartbeat was faint, eyes closed. Her face was paler than ever. Eli entered first, checked her vitals, and whispered something to the night nurse. Noah stood by the door. Graham entered last. When Clara opened her eyes, her first instinct was to look for her sons. But then her gaze froze. She saw him, the face that had once been a dream, a fear, something she'd folded away like a past best, left unopened, was now here, in flesh, in blood, and in a gaze that could burn. Graham stepped closer and sat beside the bed. No one spoke. There was no need. Only his hand reached out, resting gently on hers, carefully as if touching her might break something too fragile to survive. "I read the letter," he said, his voice thick. "I should have known sooner." Clara didn't answer. She only smiled, so faintly, like a forgiveness unspoken. Eli stood nearby, eyes red. Noah stepped forward and placed the letter beside their mother. "You can rest now, Mom. He knows." Graham turned to his sons. His eyes shimmered with a light they had never shown in any keynote, boardroom, or award stage. "I don't know how much I've missed, but if you'll let me, I'd like to start from today." Eli nodded. Noah placed a hand on his shoulder. No one cried, but in the hearts of all 3 men, something had just been pieced back together. Not perfect, but whole enough to live, whole enough to hope. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights sparkled like diamonds resting on water. On the 3rd floor of the hospital, a family had just come together after 26 years lost. No DNA is needed, no explanations, only truth and presence. Seattle, the next morning. Winter sunlight filtered gently through the third-floor hospital window at Harbor View. Not strong, not glaring, but just enough to bathe the room in a soft, tender glow, as if the world itself had taken a calmer breath after a long night. Clara was still asleep. Her face is peaceful. The monitor hummed its steady rhythm, like background music for the quiet shifts taking place in this room. Graham sat by the bed, eyes never leaving the woman who had vanished from his life, like a dream interrupted too soon. He didn't speak much, but in the way he held Clara's hand, lightly, yet without letting go, trembling, yet steady, one could read more than any words could say. Noah leaned against the wall. His suit still held the creases from the night before. Beside him, Eli was typing on a laptop. Lines of code ran down the screen, clean and purposeful. Graham turned to look. "What are you working on?" Eli looked up, eyes bright. "The project Noah and I have been building for the past 3 years. An educational platform for children with learning disabilities and limited access to technology." Noah added, "We call it Bennett Bridge." After Mom's maiden name, Graham fell silent. That name stirred something inside him, a piece of memory he once thought buried. "We're not building it to compete with anyone," Eli said. "We're building it to finish the dream Mom used to whisper every night. Technology should be a bridge, not a wall." Noah pulled up a chair and placed the laptop in front of Graham. "The software uses deep learning AI to adapt to individual learning styles. Visually impaired kids get text-to-speech. Emotionally sensitive kids get a slower pace and emotion-based interface adjustments. Every child learns their own way." Graham stared at the screen. Modules, charts, algorithms he recognized instantly. They were built on the foundation of Westfield Labs' early 2000s platform. "You used the base from Westfield 2.3, he murmured. Eli nodded. "Mom kept the old draft," Eli said. "She printed every line, every command. That's how we learned." Graham leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "The irony," he murmured. "I built an empire to create access to education for the underprivileged, and missed my own 2 sons." Noah didn't respond right away. Then he said, "What matters now is that you're here." Graham nodded quietly. It wasn't a complete redemption, but it was an honest first draft. By noon, Clara woke up. She didn't ask about medications. She didn't ask for test results. The first thing she said was, "Did you all talk yet?" Eli smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "We're showing him the software. Seems like Dad's impressed." Clara turned to Graham. "You don't need to feel guilty. I made the choice. I chose silence. But I also chose to believe that one day the boys would find their way across that bridge." Graham held her hand. "And today, they showed me. I wasn't the only one who could build." 2 days later, in the small Capitol Hill apartment, afternoon sunlight poured across the oak table where 3 men were working, together, for the first time. No distance, no titles, only one piece of software, one mission, and 3 minds share the same bloodline. Eli ran a simulated classroom session. Noah drafted a non-profit funding agreement. Graham reviewed the code line by line, offering feedback like a seasoned mentor, but with a newfound respect for the 2 young men before him. "We're going open source," Eli said. "No patents, no commercial licenses." Noah nodded. "But we'll require every partner to commit. No fees for end users." Graham tapped his fingers on the table. then smiled. Just like I told the board 10 years ago, technology isn't meant to be locked down. It's meant to be opened up. Eli looked at him, voice steady. This time, you're not doing it as a CEO. You're doing it as the father of the founders. Noah pulled a document from his folder and placed it on the table. Bennett Bridge Foundation, 3 co-founders, Clara, honorary chair. Graham picked up the pen. No hesitation, no terms. He signed. Not like the multi-million-dollar contracts he had signed in high-rise boardrooms, but the beginning of a real legacy. That night at the hospital, Graham brought Clara a small gift. She opened it, a silver-plated USB drive engraved with the words, "Bridge, not wall." "It's the source code for Westfield 2.3, he said. "I had it copied from the private backup I kept hidden. No one else has it." Clara looked at the small object in her palm as if it were a ticket back to youth. "You kept it?" "Never knew why. I just couldn't throw it away." Eli and Noah sat nearby, smiling. Clara whispered, "Then maybe nothing was really lost, just waiting for the right moment." Graham smiled. "And I'm ready now to start again, with you, with our sons, with everything we left unfinished." 6 months later. Seattle. The golden hue of sunset stretched across the glass dome of the Skyfire. The restaurant atop Queen Anne Hill that had once been the place of heartbreak, now becoming the final page of a different story. From the grand lobby to the open terrace, tonight's gala felt different. No tension, no showboating, no flashing lights. Only the radiant stillness of something deeply, quietly real. On the main stage, a large LED screen displayed the logo of a newly launched organization, Bennett Bridge Foundation. 3 simple words carrying the weight of 26 years of unspoken truths. Graham stood backstage, hands in his pockets, peeking through the red velvet curtain. Clara sat in the front row, an emerald silk dress, silver hair neatly pinned back. Her health had improved more than anyone expected. Her face still bore traces of fatigue, but her eyes gleamed with an extraordinary clarity. To her left was Eli, dressed in a classic suit. To her right, Noah, in a white shirt and simple tie. Neither wore anything flashy, because tonight, their story was the only thing that needed to shine. The host walked out on stage, voice deep and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not just witnessing the birth of a tech initiative, but the rebirth of something greater. Hope." The lights softened. The screen behind them began playing a short video. Faces of children from Texas, from Alaska, from rural Iowa. All of them used the Bennett Bridge platform. One child sounded out the word home. Another read aloud with a trembling voice. Another stacked wooden blocks into the shape of a bridge, as if an old metaphor had come back to life. No music played, only real voices, real eyes, and something quite inside every attendee bloomed. Graham walked onto the stage, No note cards, no teleprompter, just him and the truth. It took me nearly 3 decades to build an empire, but only a moment to realize what I had missed most in life. He paused, looked down at the front row. Family. The sky fire. 6 months later, Seattle's afternoon sky looked like a giant pane of frosted glass. No sun, no rain, just a velvet soft light reflecting off everything it touched. From atop Queen Anne Hill, the sky fire stood like a quiet crystal suspended in the clouds, no longer a place of isolated glamour, but now a birthplace for something simpler and far more true: connection. Outside the doors stood a modest sign: Bennett Bridge Foundation Launch Event. Technology is a bridge, not a wall. No grandeur, no bold slogans, just a gentle declaration, carrying the weight of 26 years of searching, and a family learning to walk back toward each other. 6:20 p.m. Inside the main hall, the technical team was finishing the final adjustments. The stage design was minimalist: a pale wooden podium, a black LED screen bearing the new foundation's logo, 3 human figures building an arched bridge beneath the words, Bennett Bridge Foundation. Graham stood in the wings, wearing a charcoal gray suit. No tie, no lapel pin. His salt and pepper hair combed gently to the side. On his left wrist, he turned a vintage watch, the one Clara had given him during his startup days. But his eyes weren't on the stage. They searched the audience. Clara sat in the front row, graceful in a sea-green shawl, her silver hair pinned up neatly. She looked more delicate than before, but carried a quiet resilience, like a landmark untouched by time. On either side of her sat Eli and Noah, not just a doctor and a lawyer, not just software co-founders, but 2 lives that had found their origin again, and were ready to lead forward. 6:40 p.m. The host stepped onto the stage, voice soft like an overture. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the greatest thing isn't what we've built, but the place we dare to return to. Tonight, we are not just launching educational software. We are witnessing the living proof that healing is possible, and that it's never too late to begin again. The screen behind faded into a video montage. Children from all over the world. One in a wheelchair learning to pronounce syllables. Another dark-skinned, using sign language before a specially adapted screen. No special effects. No overproduction. Just eyes, seen, understood, and taught in their own way. The lights dimmed. A round of applause. Graham stepped forward. No notes, no teleprompter, just him and the truth. I once built a company to change the world, he said. But I missed the chance to change the lives of my 2 sons. He paused. The room itself seemed to exhale more slowly. I've stood on many stages like this, talking about justice, about technology, about education. But I've never truly spoken. Tonight, I will. Every eye followed him. But Graham didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the front row, where Clara smiled gently, and Eli and Noah sat tall like two living bridges in his life. I met again the woman I once loved, and I faced my two sons at a gala, not knowing that night I was being handed a second chance. He paused again, then continued. Bennett Bridge isn't just software. It's a bridge the three of us built to repair what I once let fall. And I hope, from today forward, that bridge is one we all walk across to get closer to one another. As Graham stepped off stage, the lights softened, but the room glowed warmer, as if everyone there had just witnessed a truth being born, quiet but powerful. Then Eli and Noah walked up. No speeches, just a short exchange, as though speaking to their mother, to each other, and to all those who'd ever felt lost in life. I once learned about my father through headlines, Noah said, wrote essays praising him, not knowing who he really was. I once studied from code he had created, Eli added, and used it to help a child with disabilities learn their very first word. But none of that compares to what matters now, that today he's sitting with us, not as a CEO, but as our father. The audience stood. They clapped, not with fanfare, but like waves reaching shore after a long and endless journey. Clara wiped away tears. No one saw, but everyone felt it. After the ceremony, on a quiet terrace overlooking the city, the four of them sat at a small round table. Tea, water, no wine, no flash. Clara placed an old weathered leather journal on the table. I once thought about burning it, she said, but I kept it. Not for memories, but because I believed one day you'd read it. Graham brushed his fingers along the cover, and when I did, everything changed. Eli pulled out a USB drive. This is the open source release. Tomorrow night it'll go live globally. Any school, whether in Africa or Alaska, can download it for free. Noah placed a document on the table, and this is our final decision. We've declined every acquisition offer, even from Westfield Technologies. Graham didn't flinch. He simply smiled, the kind of smile born of pride, with no strategy behind it. Good, he said, because for the first time, I don't want to own it. I just want to belong. As night fell, the sky fire dimmed its lights, but one table still glowed, not for ceremony, not for status, but because they didn't want to leave at that moment, a moment of ordinary life, once lost. Clara turned to Graham and whispered, We didn't walk together for nearly 30 years, but strangely, I don't feel regret anymore. Graham nodded, because now we're here, together. Noah leaned on the table and asked, Did anyone think one accidental bump on the street could restart an entire family? Eli laughed, and a letter never sent could become an invitation home. Graham gently reached for Clara's hand, and a silent mother built the bridge that brought 3 lost men back. Far below, city lights snaked like arteries of life. High above at the sky fire, a chapter closed, not with an exclamation point, but with 3 quiet ellipses. A family learning to live truthfully, love deeply, and build something greater than themselves. Because some bridges aren't made of concrete, they're made of love.